All right, so the first session was a really great conversation from pilots to policy. And during that conversation, they covered a lot of the key goals of pilots and what we should be digging deeper into as we continue this work. In this session, we'll be digging into two of those main goals, one being building the pipelines for policy design, and the second, building the grassroots community and the coalitions that are supporting basic income. For narrative work, you can catch that in a later session today called Building Trust and Empathy. So without further ado, we're going to focus first on building the pipelines for policy, and I'm super excited to introduce the people working in that space. So we'll start with Lexi Gervis, who is the Director of Public Sector at Steady. Steady supports more than 10 pilots and has conducted extensive research on benefits for non-standard workers, low-wage work, and the institutional transmission of income inequality. And we have Brittany Christensen, who is the Director of Partnerships and Program Development at AidKit. She helps nonprofits and government agencies leverage technology to launch scalable guaranteed income and direct cash programs. Prior to her work at AidKit, she spent 6 years leading environmental and economic justice programs as the Executive Director at Aid Action. Then we have Josh Worth here, co-founder of Comingle. He's been working in the interactive media space since the early 90s and wore many hats. I'll go through the list here. He's interface designer, user experience designer, creative consultant, a web strategist, an interactive art director, a graphic artist, an illustrator, and animator for clients such as PBS, the American Museum of Natural History, Marvel Comics, Focus Features, and Sony Pictures. And last but certainly not least is Conrad Shaw here, also co-founder of Comingle. He's a New York-based film and stage actor and screenwriter, a graduate of the 2-year Meisner training program at the William Esper Studio in Midtown Manhattan, and has built a reputation as a respected writer and speaker in the space for universal basic income. And also a producer and co-creator of the docuseries Bootstraps. All right, so now we'll start. Each of them will give us a little background on what their organizations do, the work they're doing, how they support pilots, and potential policy. And Lexi, do you mind starting? Give us a little information about Steady.
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction, Erica. Is this working? Yeah. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm going to use my paper because there's a few key points I want to hit. So not to be a nerd, but I'll start with this. And in the little bit of time I have to tell you what Steady does, I want to hit on 4 key areas. So I want to talk about how we started, what we built since then, what it has to do with guaranteed income, and then where we see we could go from there. So Steady really started as a consumer app, and it was designed to help low to moderate income Americans, lift their incomes and increase their earnings potential. And specifically, Steady serves non-standard workers. So that's anyone who sits outside of the traditional bounds of a W-2 job, right? So that's anyone from temp workers to part-time hourly W-2 workers to platform workers, domestic workers, and the self-employed. And when these workers join our platform, they have the option to connect their bank accounts. And in so doing, they are building a community data set that actually helps individual members find better opportunities for work and earning. So that's really how we started. How we got into guaranteed income work was in 2019 when we ran an emergency cash grant program with our partner, the Workers Lab. They're based out of California. They're out here on the West Coast. And we saw in this really small scale pilot the effectiveness of cash grant transfers, especially in the moment of an emergency. And that was at the end of 2019. We all know at the beginning of 2020, the pandemic hit, right? And the Workers Lab was flooded with philanthropic dollars for people who wanted to support frontline essential workers that were left out of the benefits package that was first passed, right? So they came back to us. We had connectivity to non-standard workers. We could notice when there was a drop in income, and we could actually distribute funds to them. So this was the beginning of us bringing our guaranteed income work to scale. So in this program, I'll just take a look. We supported over $3.5 million in funding. And eventually these same workers who we provided funds to became eligible for unemployment insurance, pandemic unemployment assistance for the first time. So these workers were never eligible before. But unfortunately, many of these workers faced great barriers in accessing it. These workers who were left out of safety net systems since the beginning, so think racist Southern lawmakers in the 1930s, leaving agricultural and domestic workers out of safety net policies. These workers now were eligible for the first time, but didn't have an easy way to verify their income because they didn't have a traditional W-2 pay stub. So that's a really good segue into what we built. So understanding that we had connectivity to members' financial institutions, and in running this cash grant program with the Workers Lab, we also understood that we could recognize this drop in income. That allowed us to envision a solution that could actually solve the issues with pandemic unemployment assistance and W-2 workers, non-W-2 workers who couldn't verify their income. So that's what we built. It's called the Income Passport, and members link their financial and payroll accounts, and it allows them to create a report that's a full picture of their income that then they can preview, give permission, and send it to an eligible organization or benefit system. I think the review part is really key to what we've built, right? That means that this report is user permission. So people's data is being sent all the time to governments without their understanding of it. We built something that you can actually take a look at your report and then consent to it being sent. So you might wonder what this has to do with guaranteed income pilot work. So my argument is that our systems for cash distribution, benefit eligibility, and even social safety net policies more broadly are really deeply intertwined. So we can't think about cash distribution in a pilot without thinking about the implications for how it would be provided in a really long-term sustainable way. And within that vein, how it would become part of, a social safety net system that's technologically outdated and archaic, right? We also can't think about these kind of pilots without considering the interventions that are necessary to make our safety net accessible for all types of work and all types of workers. And many non-standard workers are actually those who experience the most income volatility, so they're often the ones in greatest need of guaranteed income. So we talked a lot in the previous session about building the pipeline. So I think we see it steady as that we're building pipelines necessary to create a kind of tech-enabled 21st century safety net. And this infrastructure needs to function both flexibly and advanced enough to accommodate guaranteed income as part of the kind of standing part of a larger benefit portfolio that's accessible by all, and that's also delivered without all of the friction and the burden that a lot of people experience when they interact with our safety net. So going from there, what could we build in a kind of utopia looking forward, which we hope is not as far away as we think. We see what we're building also as the kind of first step towards the direction of automated benefits and guaranteed income as a kind of automated stabilizer. So as we saw in our work with the Workers Lab, when we maintain connectivity to financial accounts, we're able to recognize the moment when someone experiences financial shock. So wouldn't it be great if after individuals link their accounts to an income passport, which connects to different benefit programs and agency eligibility systems, they could then be alerted when they experience a significant enough drop in income that then makes them eligible for certain public benefits. Obviously, hoping guaranteed income would be one of those. And even better in this utopia, what if they were given the option to give their permission for this information to be sent directly to these agencies so that they could automatically receive the benefits they now qualify for? We believe this could really meaningfully shift their experience of financial shock, their interaction with our government institutions, and also their ability to recover from it. So before I close, one elephant in the room, obviously, is like, what about big data? This feels a little iffy, right? To have a company stay connected to people's bank accounts. And this is something Stacey and I have actually talked about a lot. The truth is, again, as I said, people's data are being accessed and shared among companies and government systems constantly. I won't name names, but all without the person or the user knowing that their data is being shared. So what we're proposing here is to make this agentic. So people can share their data if it means getting better access to benefits that they need, and also ensuring that they have ultimate control over what is shared, if anything, with the government. So at Steady, we're building the tech-enabled safety net of the future, one that we think should be accessible for everyone. Thank you for the little bit of time to talk about it, and look forward to the conversation with our panelists.
Thank you. Yeah. Brittany, do you want to tell us a little bit about AidKit?
Yeah, I'd love to. Can everyone hear me okay? Mic check. Yeah, we good?
You're good.
Okay. Okay, great. I'll just keep talking until I see some thumbs up. There we go. All right. The volume's on. Cool. So hey, everyone. I'm Brittany Christensen. I'm the Director of Partnerships with AidKit. And AidKit is a really awesome tech platform that's focused on the how. How do we get this money out at scale? And there are just so many logistical challenges that we all face in these pilots and demonstrations. And so we're really focused on solving those problems. And I'd love to start with our origins because it's one of the reasons that I wanted to join AidKit. The founding story, I think, is just so cool. Our co-founders were the same co-founders that founded the Left Behind Workers Fund in Colorado with Impact Charitable. So we've got Jordan here from Impact Charitable in the back, and our co-founders worked together with Impact Charitable to launch and scale this amazing program that brought direct cash to undocumented workers who were not eligible for unemployment benefits when the pandemic hit. And so over the course of the last 2 years, the Left Behind Workers Fund has brought $38 million to undocumented workers in Colorado and has led to policy change, which I'll talk about a little bit later, which is very exciting. But in the process of launching and running the Left Behind Workers Fund, AidKit's founders built some systems, some tech pipelines, if you will, to be able to create applications to bring people into the fold, to be able to bring nonprofits from around the state together to work on one common platform, to be able to say, okay, how do we overcome these challenges to getting people signed up for benefits? So how do you have applications that people can both do very easily on their own, on their phones, but also ways into the safety net that are very high touch? So I like to say AidKit is where high tech meets high touch. So within our system, you can have an entire ecosystem of partners working together to sit down with applicants and input their information, to talk to them on the phone and input their information, or even text back and forth to get documents and verification together. So we're really a group of problem solvers. And I would say, at the heart of AidKit is one of our co-founders, Ben Newhouse, who's a real kind of tech genius. And he's someone that's very inspiring to work with, but he led the Dropbox Sync team, a team of over 50 engineers that were responsible for creating the cool feature where the things you put in your desktop folder are also connected to the cloud. And during the pandemic, when he and some of his close people within his community started to realize that there were going to be so many left behind workers that were not receiving the stimulus checks, he got really interested in solving that problem. And so the systems that Ben and the rest of our engineering team are building are just very, very capable of bringing the human element, human-centered design, and thinking about the user experience. So, how are the people that are receiving the benefits interacting with the system from step one? So I just wanted to call out our values too, because I think that it's important to say, we're a tech platform, so we're focused on the how, but our why is that we think that it's the people that we're accountable to are the people receiving the funds. Like, first and foremost, we are about how do we impact change at scale, and how do we do that in a way that upholds the dignity, not gives dignity, because you can never give someone dignity. You can only uphold the dignity that they have inherently. So how do we meet people where they're at with our technology and help our partners to do that? And we're also all about balancing the accessibility with integrity for the program. Because we're talking about policy change. We're talking about getting to a point where, as a movement, we can have federal policy that brings cash to everyone. We're going to be under attack eventually. We have to be able to say that these systems for getting cash out there, that they're targeting the right people. So you need to make sure that the verifying the identity of the people that are in a program and their eligibility. The systems need to be in place to be able to balance that integrity with accessibility. So that means things like, we don't just ask people, what's your home address, right? Very simple concept. Where do you live? If you don't have a home address, you're on question number 3 and you're already unable to participate and to access those benefits. So we ask people, do you have a stable home address? And if the answer is no, do you generally live or stay within these bounds? And we show a photo of a map. We don't just say, please provide your W-2s. We say, please tell us, which of these documents you have available to verify your income. And if there's none of them, is there a community organization that we could reference and speak to someone there who could vouch for your, level of need? So we are a tech platform, but we're very, very focused on that human-centered design. And we have, since the inception of AidKit and since the launch of the Left Behind Workers Fund, we've been able to support some really awesome demonstrations across the country. So Sarah Moran is here from Give Directly. We partner very closely with Give Directly in Georgia for the In Her Hands Guaranteed Income demonstration. And then we also are working on, we're the tech backbone for the Chicago Resilient Communities pilot as well, starting payments soon. So we're very, very thrilled to be working, across the U.S., coast to coast now. And yeah, we've distributed $50 million to date with 14 different programs across the country. And we've got another $130 million in the pipelines that we're going to be distributing with our partners over the next year. So very excited to be here, very, very grateful for the people that have worked so hard to put this event on, and yeah, excited to continue to talk to all of you.
Thank you so much, Brittany. And then Josh and Conrad, you gonna tag team this one?
Yeah, I mean, this is great to just hear what you guys are up to. It's amazing. I'm really impressed by everything that you're doing. And so, I mean, for me, I feel like I'm kind of a newbie to this whole space, but hopefully I fit in okay. But, when I first heard about just the concept of universal basic income on like a podcast at some point, just a while ago, it kind of blew my mind. It kind of just, like, I got this picture of like this futuristic utopia where we've all got enough money to just live. And it was like, why haven't we thought of this before? and just a world where there's just no scarcity, where it's just like something that's gone, like the plague or like CD players or something like that. And so, and for me as a freelance designer, my income just goes up and down all the time depending on who I'm working for. So like this idea that there's some kind of baseline that would help me to have some security so that I can breathe a little bit and maybe think about the things that I actually want to think about, not just the things that are where the money's at. And, and then when the pandemic hit, one of the things that I thought about one of these projects was this idea called Comingle, where it was a platform, an app that would let people pool their money together to be able to help each other pay their bills, make sure their basics were covered. And so when I was researching that a little bit, I came across this thing called the UBI calculator, which it's a tool that helps you look at different UBI policies and see how they're going to impact the economy, see how they're going to impact your own personal finances. And it was really cool. So I got in touch with the person that made it, and we got to talking, and he sort of helped me rethink and reframe how we approached Comingle. And he joined on as a co-founder and kind of helped take things to the next level. So I'll let you talk a bit, but I think first you want to, we will turn to the magic of video to describe what we're doing.
We've got a 2-minute video that does a little introduction to what Comingle is in development, but what Comingle is, what we're building it to do. If there's a way to put it on the screen and maybe turn off a light or two, then I think they have a queued up on the screen. Okay, so hopefully that was somewhat clear. We've been frantically putting that video together recently. When Josh called me, and we can turn the lights back on. When Josh called me and told me about the concept, I got very excited about a huge potential to do something sort of paradigm changing, like going on what they were talking about in the last panel of pilots today, what the parameters are, what they're doing. I saw it kind of became apparent that the power of financial technology today and the sort of the exponential potential was that we could take this idea and create a very different kind of UBI pilot, more of like an actual basic income, in that one, it wouldn't be philanthropy funded. So it's not dependent on incoming dollars from some top-down thing. It's solidarity in an app where it's basically proving the model, but of an actual basic income, like its own little government with its own little income tax. But we also can sort of do an end run around the hurdle of political will, because we don't have to sell the entire country on it. We have to, whatever niche size we get, from 1,000 to 100,000 people, we can scale to that size. And so it can be the first universalist, inclusive, starting with anyone who has a bank account, eventually trying to help people get access to bank accounts, but have something that can be permanent and sustainable and self-funding, sort of like an exponential generator for good. And so we set about going through all the details on how do we design this to be something that can last, something that can not fall prey to, capitalist models that are extractive, it can be something that can maximize public good. So the way that I generally see Comingle is building the infrastructure. Just like if we needed a UBI, we'd have to set up federal banks or postal banking or something, get everyone connected. I think of it like a circulatory system. You have the heart pumping out blood with all the nutrients, and it gets to every single cell because they're all connected, right? So we get everyone connected by this mechanism, by this automated mechanism, and make it easy, lacking stigma. Everyone plays by the same rules. And then once we have that in place, not only do we have the first, we're looking at on the order of $40 to $50 a week, so it's a partial basic income, but it opens up a huge avenue of opportunity to disperse additional funds as well. So you have a disaster aid initiative where New Orleans gets hit by another hurricane and people want to give money. Instead of waiting for FEMA or Red Cross and wondering how much is going to get there, we can transfer 98 cents on every dollar through to the people in those specific zip codes within a week. Right, and so it becomes this very efficient more efficient by orders of magnitude than our current ideas of philanthropy, and it's because we put it on top of this this infrastructure of solidarity, and we show what you can do by just connecting everyone and joining a system like this based on a UBI model.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for giving us a little background on all of your programs and projects. So now we're going to have more of a general question, and then we'll have some specifics. So the general question, all of you can answer. So at a high level, how is what you are doing helping pave the way for informing policy? What problems with current programs, specifically distribution, are you trying to solve?
More for you guys.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that this question around paving the way for policy is something that we've been thinking a lot about. I guess I'll start with the story of how the Left Behind Workers Fund ended up influencing policy. I mentioned I would do that earlier. So when our co-founders started the Left Behind Workers Fund, they had 3 goals from day one. And those goals were to stop the bleeding, get money, get cash to the people who need it as quickly as possible. Goal 2 was create visibility for these populations in the government's eyes, make sure the state is aware of the issue and understands the inequity. And goal number 3 was to create permanent legislative change. And here we are 2 years later, and we've checked all those boxes. And never take credit for policy because it's such a just wild animal and so many factors involved. But just very recently, within the last couple of weeks, the governor of Colorado signed legislation for the Benefits Recovery Fund, which allows undocumented workers in Colorado to draw on the unemployment trust if they do become unemployed. And so for those workers that are receiving pay stubs, and there's estimates that that's somewhere around a third to 40% of the undocumented population in Colorado, they can now draw upon those funds in a permanent fashion. So I think part of the reason that we were successful in that effort is because we had some awesome data to back it up, and we had the tools available to create a lot of visibility. So something that's really kind of unique about AidKit is we're a platform that not just the program administrator uses, but that can also be used by the city, the county, the state, can also be used by the CBOs and other nonprofit partners that are helping with outreach. And so what you end up with is this power in numbers that can really supersede and rise above some of the challenges that we all face with competing for funds and program size, and allows these coalitions to work together to influence change at scale, and then to have the data to show, this is what happened and this is what we're learning. And we're also really big on empowering our partners with data, so giving them access to their data from their program and giving them the ability to, and working hand in hand with our partners to dissect the data and really be able to answer questions. So, for example, we will, we do automated communications. So if somebody applies for a program and the program administrator is using AidKit, we'll send an email or a text message and say, thank you for applying. And, and as time goes on, if there's a research component, the research surveys can also be sent through AidKit as well. And so what you end up with is a system of connected data that is really, really powerful. If someone needs to update some of their information, not only does the administrative partner get that, but the research partner can get that as well. And if you need to do some outreach, or if you need to connect with someone and say, hey, instead of an income verification document, you sent us a picture of your turtle, which has happened. But you can call them up and say, that's amazing. Are you having a hard time finding your W-2? Because we can maybe help you figure out another way to prove your income. So anyhow, this level of being able to see people where they're at, meet them there, connect the data, and show, tell the story to legislators, I think is kind of where we're focused. And, more recently, one of our program partners has been using AidKit for their qualitative research as well. And so I was thinking about that during the narrative work conversations, and, how do you, within the platform, call somebody up and talk to them about their experience and interview them and capture that data and have it connected to all the data for that program. So, yeah, and then I'll just also mention, we never sell or share data outside of the program. So, each program, it's specific to that program. We have no additional uses for that data. It's just to power the program and get cash to people, and then to whatever extent the aggregated data can be helpful in influencing policy change. Of course, we leverage that with our partners.
Thank you. I'd love to jump in on that one too, because I think sometimes there's this idea that you're going to create a policy and then you're going to build the technology to support that policy. So the policy comes first and the technology comes second. And I think there's actually much more of an interplay between the two. So I think we saw that, in the example I gave about pandemic unemployment assistance, for the first time this policy was passed, but then the rollout went terribly because there was no technology to support it. And that created a lot of negative blowback around the policy itself, right? And it ended up being that when the pandemic when the pandemic ended. It's not over, but when the relief around the pandemic ended, that policy didn't stay in place, right? Because there wasn't an infrastructure to support it. And I think, in my previous life, in my academic life, I studied portable benefits, which are proposals to create benefit systems for non-standard workers who aren't tied to employers. And a big question is, what is going to be the technological infrastructure that's going to make that happen, right? How can you look across people's different income streams and understand how much they're making and use that, to then fund benefits? And again, something that SETI's doing around income verification would enable that. And I think, we had a conversation with someone at the DOL the other day, and the idea that the technology exists to make it happen can help answer some of the policy questions so that the policy can actually get passed, right? Because we can say, we have a system that does this. We have a system that can understand the full picture of someone's income. We have a system that can understand what each employer should contribute. This is justification for us to be able to do this kind of policy. So I think building the technological pipelines isn't an afterthought. It's often actually, positively contributing to getting policy passed. And I think the same thing will happen in guaranteed income, because it's a thing that outside of our small community, a lot of people don't understand, and it feels like a little bit scary. How would we do that? And I think having the kind of, in all the pilot work we're doing, and the work that you're doing, and the work that we're doing, and all the work that the distribution partners are doing, and our partners in designing the policy and distributing, we're answering a lot of the questions around the infrastructure that could make the policy much more easy to get passed, much more easily passed. I don't want to say easy, but more easily passed because the infrastructure exists. So I think it's really important to think about those two things in tandem.
Yeah, I really like that point. I think the way I see something like Comingle helping with policy, at first it seems like it's like an end run around government policy, right? The idea of doing it private, doing it voluntary. I think there's something really powerful in being able to dodge the political will hurdle in that way. Basically, what we're doing is creating its own little government with its own little income tax, right? So you can show a working model, you can show the infrastructure, like what you're saying with the infrastructure. If we had federal banking or a UBI sort of system in place, even if it were partial at the beginning of the pandemic, when they decided to give out stimulus checks, it wouldn't have taken 6 months to get anything. Yeah. We could have done it on the next day, right? Yeah. And that's kind of what we want to show is possible to do and put in place, and also show that it's possible for it to pay for itself and that sort of thing. If we can show that model with something permanent, and then it's very easily translatable to, like, why can't the government do this? Mm-hmm. Secondly, I think there's an opportunity with what we're building to really make the implementation of pilots and experiments very sort of turnkey and adaptable to different parameters. We would love to become someone who can facilitate, a much easier and effectively subsidized pilot for a mayor for the guaranteed income, or for anyone who's running any sort of initiative like that, where we can say, listen, we have this infrastructure in place of a basic income that is, prosperity funded among the membership. And if you want to run an initiative on top of it, we can layer that on top of it. We can get it done in, a month rather than a year of setup, and we can effectively save you a lot of money, and we can make it permanent. So my hope with that is we'll be able to do enough of these things that we'll have the treasure trove of data from a permanent partial basic income that is the heartbeat of the Comingle app, but also we'll have all kinds of different impact data coming in from all over the place, because we'll make it easier to do these trials and easier to coalesce all these data along adaptable parameters. And then the last thing that's really exciting to me, and it's relevant to the other work I'm doing with the docuseries Bootstraps, is if you're going to pass something that is so obviously populist, it has to be something that is very much about power to the people. It has to be a movement, is my opinion. It has to be an activism thing. And you have to have the fire under the asses, honestly, of politicians. Either you can think of it that way, or the ground has to be safe to tread upon. There has to be a lot of demand. So what I see about creating a sustainable and scalable sort of population, a platform and a membership, is building that movement, building a permanent movement that's not reliable on, the whims of certain foundations to continue funding or to try new things and get like temporary data out of, but rather creating a large pool of people that are now invested in this in an ongoing way, and let that grow organically and hopefully exponentially to a point where we have a large population of people that are having this lived experience of a different paradigm, and that can be translated into pressure and evidence of how it can work.
Thank you, guys. So this question is specifically for AidKit and Steady. So we're asking, what are some of the biggest learnings you have experienced from being a distribution partner for pilots? And since we're running a little bit behind, if you could just think of maybe one or two of the most important lessons that you've learned.
Yeah, so I would say with the actual disbursements of funds, there's, the question around what are the mechanisms, right? What are the payment methods? How can you make sure that people that are on the margins of society are able to be brought into the fold? And so from our origins with the Left Behind Workers Fund, we had to right away figure out how to get funds to undocumented individuals, some of whom had the ITIN numbers, and many of whom did not. And so how do you serve the undocumented? How do you serve the unbanked? How do you make sure that people have adequate choice in their payment method? Because we talk about the dignity of choice within the cash movement, and I think that needs to be upheld in everything that we do. And so we provide options like direct deposit to any bank account that the recipient may have, or a debit card or Western Union or a check, and we're looking into other partners as well, but we're able to serve both the banked and the unbanked, the documented and the undocumented, the housed and the unhoused. In some circumstances, we've helped with getting cell phone access to the unhoused community and working with them with bank accounts to get set up. So I think that when we're thinking about disbursement, we have to just be very careful to think when we make those choices about how we're going to let the funds flow, who are we excluding, and trying to be as inclusive as possible.
Great, I'll keep it to one lesson because we're running behind time. And I think one of the most important things that we've learned is the necessity of building trust with participants. So as exciting as the idea of just getting cash is, people are just distrustful they've had bad interactions with our financial institutions and our government especially, right? So we need to figure out how to build trust with participants. And what we've found is having a relation. We have community support specialists on our side who work one-on-one with people. So if they're having issues getting their bank connected for ACH transfer, if they're having issues receiving their debit cards, we offer all of those options, but they can actually speak to someone on the phone who can work with them one-on-one. But we also have a really good relationship with local on-the-ground program administrators, because those are the people that are interacting with these people, daily, monthly, whatever it is. We're working with a program in North Carolina right now that is going to be distributing funds to homeless individuals. And so we're working really closely with the center that works directly with these individuals, and they're going to be the touch point. So we're training the trainer, so we're letting them know how this is going to work, so they have all the details, but then they can be a personal touch point with each of these people and build trust, as well as with us if they call, for our community support specialists. So I think having that relationship in the community, and if we can't physically be there, it's important that the people that are working with people in individual communities are there, and they work closely with us, and they know how our systems work, and we're available, but we're also available to them. So I think kind of creating that community that spans from us to the organizing community and then to the individuals has been really important, and making it effective and making sure people stay linked and can continue to receive payments just beyond the first month, right? Because these programs go on for a long time and people's circumstances change. So even having a nuanced understanding of a circumstance changed, we might need to change the distribution method, right? Might need to go now to a debit card, and why. All that stuff comes from having that kind of personal touch point in the community.
All right, thank you too. And so Conrad and Josh, what is the long-term vision for Comingle? And when we do get to a federal basic income, will Comingle still exist?
I have a few answers to that. First, is as the brain would say, take over the no. So long term, it's very important to us to build something that's like not VC funded. That's we're looking into structuring something more like a steward ownership toward cooperative, blended, nonprofit model. Like we're trying to figure out what exactly it needs to be so that it can be mission-driven long-term, because this is something private and this is something with an opportunity for a lot of revenue that we want to make sure is not directed towards individual shareholders, but rather towards public benefit. And at scale, if we reach that kind of revenue, the sort of things we want to do begin with expanding access for the existing members, either through partnerships or through our own development of easy online banking. I was talking to Brittany before about, what was it, Chime? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Chime? Yeah. And we've talked to Steady and AidKit about like ways to partner in the future. Like if we can make just the transfer of money very seamless and easy for people, then we could focus on the touch points and things like that and connect people to more services. But online banking, some sort of, ease the way into like sort of connectivity, social media. I hate to say social media, but something where people can connect with people in their community to access different opportunities or whatever without any financial incentive for engagement or clicks or anything like that. We want to set up a model that it's, if you set it and forget it for 10 years or you're engaged with your community all day, it doesn't matter to the revenue, because the revenue is set up like a utility. And then longer term, as we build out these value adds for the members, so that maybe people who are contributing because they like contributing are also getting, free access to other things at some point. At a certain scale, the idea is to go international and create these in different countries, and maybe like Comingle.de in Germany or Canada, they have a high enough average income there that they can sort of fund their own Comingle right off the bat, but with a small fraction of a percentage of the excess revenue from the American pool, what you could effectively endow basic incomes in places that don't have high enough average income to justify or to create like a good enough basic income, like a significant enough basic income. So I'm really excited about the idea of at some point being able to learn and partner with people like Give Directly and say, how do we get an infrastructure on the ground in a place which doesn't have a very well-established banking system, for example, or if you have to use cell phones and some sort of crypto technology to get money to people, how do we set that up with you? And then how do we use this extra money that's coming in to endow those things so that they've got a real basic income there that is much more than, expecting people that are too low income to begin with to be funding their own thing on prosperity. So the idea is to create scale it up as much as possible to create an engine for good. That's why our motto is strength in numbers. Is the bigger it gets, not only the more reliable and resilient it gets as a community, but the more powerful it gets in terms of spreading more money to more people who just need access to cash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think like Conrad mentioned, sort of like the idea that it is a government, it's a mini government, and it's that's not what we're trying for, but in a sense, like what is government? It's really people that are trying to organize themselves in some way. So, and at the very base level, like. Shouldn't a government be a bunch of people trying to just look out for each other? And so that's what we're trying to use technology to let people do that. We want that technology to be in the hands of the people that are using it. So the data that's there, if there's money to be made off of it, they will get it. That money will go to them in the form of how big the dividend is, and any benefit that comes to the company is going, in the way we want to structure it, will go to the people that are part of it. And so, and if that can continue on into other countries, if those countries can then like interact with each other, then it's truly like people democratizing themselves. And because money is at the very core of it, money is at the very core of power and everything, that if that is truly in the hands of the people using this technology, then we've got ourselves like a system that is not beholden to the whims of, whatever, insane leadership we've got trying to take us in whatever direction. So, I mean, that's my picture of it, you know. So, and whether it will a UBI at a federal level make us irrelevant? Maybe. I'd be okay with that. Like,
Yeah.
that would be just fine. We'd do something else.
Or go to another country or whatever. But yeah, long-term vision, and this is why it's so important not to have it be a typical shareholder sort of situation, is that if we can create this engine for funneling actual money, like, and I know a lot of people in here have probably been trying to fundraise for different projects in the UBI space or any space for a long time, and it's a nightmare, and it's like asking permission from the wealthy class. If we have this generator of money that can be directed through mission-aligned, you know, basic income sort of goals and funneled towards all of these projects, that's sort of my dream, you know?
All right, well, thank you all so much. So now we'll be shifting to our second goal, which is building the grassroots community and coalitions that support basic income and doing that work in the pilot space. So I want to invite up Kia and Stacey to the stage. I'm sorry.
We're going to talk for a few minutes, and then we'll open up questions for everybody, just because I'm sure there's tons. I have tons of questions. As they were talking, I was like, wait a second, tell me more about that. So we'll open it up to questions after Key and I chat for just a little bit about the grassroots side of things.
Yeah, so I'll just give a super quick intro. So Kia Poehler, she is the director of San Diego for Every Child. They're running a pilot for families in San Diego and San Isidro. She has several years of experience fostering collaboration, facilitating dialogue, and implementing policy to make improvements in health, human services, and criminal justice systems. And Stacey Rutland, founder of Income Movement, she was first in the classroom, landed in user experience project agencies, and eventually was in the nonprofit space. She has a passion for economics and human-centered program design, and that brought her into the basic income community. And then, yeah, so San Diego for Every Child and Income Movement have been working together for the past year, and they've been focusing on the broader community engagement, and not just the broad community members, but also building partner coalitions. So you can tell us a little bit about what that looks like, what that work looks like, and Kia, what made you want to dig into this work?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm super excited about the conversation today, and being here talking about our program specifically. What drew me to the work is a really interesting story, and I'll try and give just a snippet of it. But before I even got to San Diego for Every Child, I was in the midst of leaving another position, and at the same time developing an interest in supporting working class Black women and thinking about this concept of a guaranteed income. And I was hosting focus groups, and this was connected to the work I was doing in community and still am doing around cooperative ownership with my other business. So I got connected to San Diego for Every Child in a really synchronistic way. And I came to the organization as they were developing a design for the first guaranteed income pilot in San Diego County, and that's the one that I came to lead and also combine with the work I was already doing with talking to community and getting out there and actually gauging the sentiment around guaranteed income. So when I got to San Diego for Every Child, it's a newer organization formed around 2018, and our mission is to end childhood poverty, at least cut it in half by 2030 in San Diego County. And when the pandemic hit in 2020, our community advisory board decided that there needed to be a way to directly support families and do it in a way that was dignified and quick. Yes. And so the conversations about guaranteed income were not only what I was doing, with my focus groups, but a national movement. It had been for a few years. And so that was our first direct service pillar, that we integrated with our awareness and coalition building around childcare, early education, food insecurity, and healthcare. Guaranteed income became the first arm of that work, and we decided on 150 families, $500 for 2 years. And we're looking at families that are 200% or lower of the federal poverty level, which was $53,000 for a family of 4. And we started that work officially kicking off the community engagement last year in 2021. I'm so excited to talk more about that. And we got our first payments out this year in March. So families have been receiving payments since March of this year.
I think one of the things, maybe when we are thinking about the framing of grassroots work and kind of community engagement as a whole, and that has been really exciting that we've been able to do together with Kia and San Diego for Every Child, is we think about community engagement or community as an idea. We really think about the different kinds of groups of people that make up a community and how do we want to interact with those folks. So in our minds, you know, there's when we think about community engagements, it's people within San Diego for Every Child, like the team. It's their advisory, you know, organizations. How do we think about bringing them into the fold, understanding more about the broader movement for basic income, getting comfortable with the ideas of basic income so that they can socialize those within their own organizations, or when they are having contact and, you know, and having conversations with their community members, they're understanding what basic income is, what the tenets, the ideas are, narrative change that we want to do, whatever those things are, so that they can come at it, you know, wholeheartedly. A lot of the pilot organizations across the country that are actually running the pilots many of them are actually coming from the service provider side of things. So they've been providing wraparound services for, you know, housing or whatever it might be. They generally don't have a background in activism and grassroots building. And so being able to help think about how to engage folks who that's not necessarily their first area of expertise to become an advocate for the idea of basic income is a really important piece to community engagement. And then of course, there's the broader community, and that can be elected officials, that can be everyday community members, it can be organizations that maybe aren't partners but are interested in or doing other kind of adjacent work in that kind of intersectionality of economic justice and all these other kind of components. And then of course there's the recipients themselves, and thinking about how do you engage with the recipients to support narrative work, to empower them to take it, you know, to be able to have a platform to speak their truth and tell their stories, and also help them understand more about the broader movement that's happening for basic income. A lot of the time, I think in our work with pilot organizations, a lot of the time the broader community, however that's defined, really kind of all the community members think about the pilot as a program, that it's a very specific hyper-local program, just like a mutual aid program that's, you know, very much so rooted and geared to the folks in community. But the reality is that there's a movement happening. There's elected officials that are fighting for this. There's policy being presented at a wide range of levels. And so for us, as soon as we start to talk about and tie pilots to the broader movement, people get much more invested, much more excited, and also start to build that trust that, like Lexi was starting to talk about around, you know, most people think it's too good to be true. Like, there's no way that's really actually happening. Like, okay, this is some little thing that these 100 families are going to get because somebody around here decided it would be a good idea. As soon as you start to say, no, your governor is actually doing some work in this space, your mayor supports this, suddenly people are excited. They want to get involved. They want to help make this thing happen for all of their neighbors, all of their family members. And that's really kind of at the core of the community engagement piece. Like, how do we connect with people? How do we help them understand the broader work? How do we elevate their voices, you know, and connect their work, their voices, their stories to a national movement? And pilots do just such amazing work on the ground and have so many amazing relationships. Like, how can we help them be empowered to do as, you know, as deep of work as they want to in that community space? And San Diego for Every Child is just like amazing in the space, for sure. So we've had a chance to do work both with the kind of advisory group of organizations, and then we also, as the rollout was happening, we're able to do some community events that I'd love for you to be the one that actually talks about, but that was an opportunity for us at that really critical moment of applications. Like, applications are starting to come in. How do we make sure we don't lose trust of people or have people feel like I'm going to be joining another thing that feels very invasive or feels very difficult to like kind of engage with? How do we make sure that's like not what's happening, that it's a very different kind of experience?
So do you want to touch on the pilot community engagement program, or would you like to open it up more to Q&A?
I can. I mean, I'm gonna, I just thought that there would be more questions. So let me give kind of a little more context and then dig into some of that, because it's the best part of the work. The challenge, I think, that San Diego for Every Child had as a whole in bringing the project to fruition is the community engagement piece of it. We had great support from MGI, which we were so grateful for, and their relationship with the Center for Guaranteed Income Research. And as a randomized controlled trial, we had a certain level of legitimacy, for lack of a better word, legitimacy from some of the folks who could actually unlock the money that we needed to get the pilot done. So our mayor is on board, Mayor of San Diego. We had mayor from National City who signed off on it and said, this is a great idea. It would be beneficial to the folks in my community. And so we had, those really important pieces covered. It was really connecting with the people who would be essentially participants in the program and a part of that larger movement that really needed to happen and hadn't been worked into the design of the program. We had the community advisory board, but when it came to the actual participants and the recipients and the people who might, resemble the people that will be receiving the money, we had to tap into it. So when we were on our way to opening up the application process, we said, okay, we have to really look at our timeline and see if we can reasonably do some good community engagement before this opens. We had done media, and that did wonders. It was awesome to be on the local news and let people know about what the project is, who we are, learn, what we're about and what we aim to do. But that deep work and just hearing from people about what this program would do was really important. So we did the focus groups with community-based organizations, practitioners in the field that works directly with families. We asked for top-level leadership as well as caseworkers to be involved in those conversations, and really just ask them questions about what's going on in their community, from San Ysidro to National City to Central San Diego, the 4 zip codes, which I didn't mention at the start, that we were looking at for our pilot. And we know that those zip codes have all of these intersecting indicators that said high vulnerability. So we know that the communities are struggling with high levels of unemployment. We know that the rent burden is over 30% of their income. We know that a lot of children are living in poverty within these zip codes. We know there's lack of access to healthy food. So we have all of this, this data that says, hey, this is what's going on. But when we talk to the leaders of these programs and the leaders of these organizations, we learned also about the services that were being provided to help people make ends meet. And, all kinds of things, from these really interesting lending networks that are going on in San Ysidro, building towards ownership of property happening in San Ysidro with low-income parents. In Central San Diego, we have programs that are focused specifically on the health of Black community And we got to hear, things from community that said, what would we do with this extra money? What time, and opportunity cost do we have when we're working so hard, and yet, we still can't make ends meet, or we're just barely getting by? What would a guaranteed income mean for me? And, we saw the conversation range. Each neighborhood had a different concern. There was undocumented community in the room. For context, San Ysidro is right near the border, the San Diego-Mexico border. And so we had larger family sizes that were asking questions like, will I be excluded from the program? Do I need to be a citizen? And how complicated is this going to be for me to take part? Is this going to be exclusionary like the safety net? So it was important for us to hear that and really think about that as we move forward with the narrative change and the work that we did. So in the community sessions, we did really good observation activities, as well as watch Inherent Good, the film, which I think was key because a lot of folks didn't even know what guaranteed income or universal basic income is. And so when they got to see that film, they got to write down their observations and take some notes. And then we did small group and large group conversations on the feelings and the thoughts that came up. And we saw that people saw themselves in the stories that they were seeing, and they could also see themselves belonging to a broader movement that they could actually be a part of by participating in this pilot or advocating for the goals of our program and our pilot.
Yeah, and in a very kind of brass tacks, the community events that Key is referencing. So we brought together in very short time, because Key is exactly. I think we first had a conversation about 5 or 6 weeks prior to the application launching. Like, it was everything was already moving. Like, this is the date that everybody's moving towards. And Kia was like, we have to do work with the community. Like, this can't just be something where we open up an application and online and a bunch of, applications are sent in, and then we announce to the 2% of people who actually get it, and that's that. So we pulled together a few community events and with the amazing partners that San Diego for Every Child had, with the YMCA, with all these different organizations, we were able to really quickly host events. And these events were rooted in community. The locations were in the hubs of neighborhoods in the zip codes. But most importantly, we worked with a bunch of different partner organizations to make sure that there was dinner. It was like kind of a night out for the family. At the YMCA, the kids could go and play and be crazy, in one room. The parents could kind of have a break from the kids, have a good meal. The kids are, eating pizza or doing whatever they're doing. And then have a movie night, watch a movie, and then have some real conversations. And tie this thing that everybody in the room was now thinking about potentially applying for, tie it to this broader movement, and tie it to the leadership in their community that actually is advocating for it and working hard towards it. And it's, the transformation, I think this is going to come up a lot, and in the narrative work in particular, the brass tacks of actually how to engage with individuals to unpack the bullshit that is out there around people living in poverty. And this is not just people who are not living in poverty. This is internalized by people who themselves are living in poverty. I don't deserve that. It's a handout. All of these kinds of things, are really hard to unpack, and it takes really thoughtful, well-organized events where people can feel safe to start to unpack that. And that's a hard thing to do. It's not impossible, but it's a very complex thing to do. And it's where those partnerships are so important. That the YMCA, all those people in that community trusted the YMCA, where they're coming there, to sit down together and have a real conversation. And I think when we think about grassroots building and the amazing opportunities that pilots have to do this, there is that opportunity to take all the trust that is in the community and those task forces and organizations and start to talk about how people in the community deserve this. I think one of my favorite moments was that elderly gentleman, a grandpa, that was in a household of, multi-generation household. This really just very lovely Mexican man stood up at the very end, and he was like, everybody had these observations. They were writing things. We were building this big wall of like everything that people had kind of in the room talked about, and that was kind of hitting them emotionally. And this grandfather stood up and he was like, the reality is we have to know that we deserve this. Corporations don't ask, do we deserve this tax break? Like, it's never part of the conversation, but it's our conversation all the time with us of like, do I really deserve that? I don't, and especially, a group of people who are immigrants and have come here to make better for themselves. They have a certain level of need to prove that they are going to be beneficial to our economy. They're not going to, all this stuff. But it was just really powerful and beautiful to be like, we just spent 2 hours together and we're having these moments where people are like, yes, this is the shift that we need to start making together as a community. Mm-hmm. And now there's something we can do in our community to support and kind of fight for at the, when we start to think about policy and stuff.
Oh, I love that. That was a beautiful moment. And it was, quickly before we go to Q&A, it was interesting to see things that, I didn't even expect to hear in terms of the broader economy and the ways in which people in our communities are putting those pieces together, right? So when we started to watch Inherent Good, and folks started to understand and use the vocabulary and the terminologies of some of these systems, and that reminded me of someone that wrote on one of the sticky notes, trickle up economics. This is, working from the people up to provide what we need, but also stimulate the surrounding economy, and how important doing it in this way is to me and my family. And as a result, the ripple effect is tenfold out in the community. And it was a very sophisticated conversation that we were able to have. And when we talk about pilots to policy, I mean, the people already know, they have it and they have the experience of it. So it's about really highlighting that and lifting that up and pairing that with the data and the research, but really centering that voice that is so knowledgeable of the experience.
Well, thank you guys so much for sharing. And I think we'll move into the Q&A. If anyone has a question, you just have to turn the mic on, and then it looks like Chelsea's going to help us with anyone in the virtual space who has a question. If you can say your name and what organization you're from.
My name is Scott Santons. I'm Senior Advisor for Humanity Forward, and also the author of the book that everybody can get a free copy of over here. But my question is, so since this panel is about future UBI pilots, I think what gets lost in the conversation a lot is based on data. And I think really personally, some of the most powerful stuff can just be a single story that comes out of these pilots. So my question to each of you, I'd like to hear is, what is your personal favorite singular anecdote that you've heard or learned from a pilot? And also, and this could be the second one or just instead, but also what singular anecdote would you like to see happen as a result of the future pilot?
I can start with a quick one. So the other project I've been working on is the Bootstraps docuseries, and we ran a UBI trial for that. And we tried to get people from all over the country, different walks of life, everything, different incomes, all the way up to middle class. We had this guy we found. We were looking for someone who had a coal mining background. And this guy named Norm, and he's the most acerbic guy you ever met. And he's really fun in his ways, but he's also challenging. But he's been stuck in North Carolina for several years. To hear him tell it, he made a bad decision for a woman or whatever, and then quickly found himself stuck down there. And he'd been wiped out by several hurricanes, just over and over, but he never had the money to get out. He described himself tied to his bed and tied to his dog, riding out Hurricane Matthew because they had nowhere to go, and then sitting in the water, you know, up to up above the floor for a week, you know. And you know, we asked him what he wanted to do with it, and his main story arc was, I want to get out of here. I want to get back to, you know, the hills, back up to like Pennsylvania, West Virginia area, whatever. And 6 weeks after we started, so it ended up taking him a full 2 years. He finally got out. It's a good ending. He gets out of West Virginia. But like 6 weeks after we started, Hurricane Florence comes through, and in, you know, the way he talks about it is he has no doubt he would have had to ride it out, and he doesn't even know if he says, I don't know if I would have survived it. He was able to buy gas, pack up his chickens and his dog and some of his belongings, and drive inland, you know, to Tennessee after only 6 weeks. We were doing it weekly, so he had about a month and a half worth of UBI, and immediately didn't have to ride out the hurricane. And he's not the sort of person you would immediately think would be for UBI or anything like that, but it was an immediate, enormous impact for him. And watching him in that circumstance versus all of the other fighting he did, he spent the 2 years applying for FEMA and just understanding how federal aid and all that stuff works, and just seeing the very stark dichotomy of just how impossible it is to get any help versus how quickly he was empowered to help himself is one of my favorite stories out of that. I haven't thought much about like what story I'd want to see. You know, someone decides to, I like the artistic ones. Maybe someone decides to like write a novel or do a song and becomes a hit, then they would have been working at Subway or something like that, you know.
I'm going to only answer part two, I guess, maybe. Because we aren't running any pilots, I feel it's a little bit murky for me to share like data or information that's kind of stories that have come out of some of the work. I'll leave that to those who are actually kind of doing that to understand where that line is. I think one thing, I'm going to just kind of step right into what I think is really an important piece for right now, which is with the route that things are going with women's access to abortion. For me, what I want to see is as much money going to as many poor women of color as possible, so that women can access their like reproductive health rights, whether it's being able to actually like afford to have birth control, because we know that that's actually cost prohibitive for a lot of women out there, but also to be able to travel to get access. There's going to be a lot more traveling, a lot more costs required to be able to do that. So for me, I think that the lay of the land right now, and it, you know, we didn't talk about it. It didn't come up in the first, in the first conversation, but when I think about basic income, it is absolutely about gender justice and racial justice. And when we think about what's happening with healthcare right now for women in particular, this is the time, you know, that goal of like, let's get as much money out the door to as many people as possible while we're trying to do policy. I just think that the need has never been more significant.
Yeah, I would piggyback off of that and say, I don't know that there's one single story for me that stands out. It's more of a tapestry of different experiences while we're thinking about and walking through this pilot. All of the intersecting, I mean, there's a lot of work to do in all sectors that really practical implications of guaranteed income. There's connections to all of them. And so I think about, you know, there's a father in our narrative change cohort who was able to get custody of his kids a few years ago after experiencing homelessness and finding some stability. And now he has 3 daughters and he's able to provide clothing and school supplies and the things that they need, really basic needs for them. And it's a burden lifted off of his back to know also that he can pay a full bill. Instead of paying half of a phone bill, you can pay the full bill and, not have to deal with this revolving interest cycle that happens to people who are experiencing poverty. Stories like that, or, the woman who got guaranteed income and is able to leave her part-time service industry job and seek her nurse practitioner's license and have the time and the space and the energy to do that while receiving this money. Huge. And these are families of color. That's one of the things that we targeted specifically, intentionally, and, happenstance, right? Because of all of those intersecting factors that I mentioned. In these communities, in these specific zip codes, communities of color. And so we can't ignore the race question when we're talking about guaranteed income or universal basic income, and the extent to which we can do more research, we can do more qualitative work on understanding what's actually going to close those disparities long term, I think needs to be woven into the conversation about how pilots are designed and evaluated, what questions we're asking. That sort of work is still, there's a lot of richness to it, and I think can be tapped for the greater benefit of UBI and guaranteed income and any federal policy that does come down.
I guess I'll chime in. I've had a lot of thoughts running through my mind while listening to these beautiful anecdotes. And I come from a rural context. I've always lived in small towns my whole life. I live in New York and everyone thinks New York City, but I live in like a town of 1,800 people in the woods. And anyway, I just think that the power of UBI in rural areas is really exciting to think about. Living in communities my whole life where the downtown is hollowed out, where there's nowhere to get coffee, where there's nowhere to gather, where there's no access to healthcare, where food insecurity is rampant, and there's not a grocery store within 30 miles. Like, how do we get resources to rural America? And how do we start thinking about, bridging that divide between rural and urban and the political divide that goes along with it? And so, I spent probably 8 to 10 years, all of my 20s, essentially after college, farming. And I'm really excited. Like, if there was like an anecdote that I'd want to see, it's what I want to see is rural farm workers, whether they are, migrant farm workers or domestic farm workers, having a basic income that they can use to settle in those rural communities and to have a lifestyle working with the land. Not being trapped behind a computer screen, but working under the sun and being able to afford housing and being able to have access to food and healthcare in that rural setting. So.
I'll round us out. I'll go quickly. We've done a lot of amazing work with formerly incarcerated individuals. We've worked with, young parents. For some reason, the anecdote that keeps coming back to my mind is this program I was talking about where we're working with homeless individuals. And it's actually a text that I received from John, our contact who's running the program on the other side, after he had gotten to share with the first person that they had made it into the program. And what an unbelievably emotional experience it was for him, and how joyful he was to be able to do this, how positively it was received. And I think I was thinking about that in the context of what we were talking about earlier, that all these people are affected by what we're doing. So this is not just having a positive ripple effect on every single person that's receiving it, but also all the people within our community that are working with it, right? So the joy and meaning and empowerment that brought to him, as well as the individual that was receiving it, it's really interesting to think about it as a whole network that's receiving those effects.
I wanted to add one more little thing because it's all flooding back to me as you talk, like the stuff I've repressed from like the 3 years of following people closely. I think my favorite is the very nuanced, unexpected ones, like that you don't think about until you're there, like someone being present in the hospital with their kid undergoing surgery and just being able to witness how much they're just there with them and not worrying about their rent, or someone being able to fly home we had someone fly home to Lebanon to be with her mother while she passed, and just the things that no government program's going to account for those things. There's a million of those things we witness that just slam in the face every day is the access to making the choices that are more for me about love and presence with people around you that people were able to make. It was really beautiful.
All right, thank you all so much. And I apologize to our virtual attendees who are not able to get to any of your questions, but thank you all for sharing. I really enjoyed hearing about your work and your experience. And if we can get a round of applause for our wonderful panel. All right.